Welcome everyone. In this chess video we're going to be taking a look at this really nice concept of what's known as a dream position. And so this is a concept from International Master Jeremy Silman, and so I hope it will help everyone. So in this video I plan to explain kind of the idea behind this concept and then show 3 different examples from my own games where I use this type of thinking while I play. So in my examples, I'm going to start off with a fairly simple or at least short example, which is the position that we have up here. Then I'll go into a bit more of an advanced example of this. And then lastly, I'm going to show an example of this where it actually exploits what my opponent does wrong. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Okay, so here in this position, this is the short one here, where in this position, I'm actually up a pawn. And so we are kind of in this more of an endgame type scenario. And if we look at Black's position here, they really only have this deep, pass pawn on c3, but it's also an isolated pawn and might be vulnerable to attack. So now we have to start thinking this dream position. So the whole idea behind a dream position is Jeremy Silman came up with this idea, which is very closely tied to his book on the imbalances, which is called How to Reassess Your Chess. I have the 4th edition, which is the famous one. But basically the whole concept of the book is understanding the imbalances, the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses, the good and the bad of each position, each side, and kind of trying to understand what each side should be playing for. And then from there, you try and accentuate your strengths based on what you have, and you try and exploit your opponent's weaknesses based on these imbalances. Sounds simple enough, but now what about this dream position? How does that, combine with this? So the concept of a dream position is whenever you're in any position, you have to find, how can I make progress? How can I improve? And sometimes that means the imbalances. That could be in strengths. Now, in this case, what we do is we plan, okay, what would be an amazing thing we could do? What's some dream, literally dream position that we could try and set up if possible? And oftentimes it's not going to be possible. We'll reject those for one reason or another. Maybe our dream position takes too long to achieve. Maybe our opponent is not going to let us get that. But whenever we have an idea in mind, then we think, can we try and force this idea? Can we make plans to make this actually happen? And if the answer is yes, then maybe we should go for it. If the answer is no, then we scratch the whole plan and we come up with a different dream idea. And maybe in that dream position, maybe that one is feasible. And eventually, it's a good way to kind of get you into the process of making plans and how to improve your position. So here, this deep c3 pawn is actually something that I want to target. It's also Black's strength perhaps, but it might also be weak. So if I could win that pawn, that would be like a dream for me because I'm already up a pawn. If I could get rid of their only pass pawn here, that would be a really big win for me, probably the game. So how can I actually add pressure to this c3 pawn? Well, what I would really love to do, a real dream, would be as if I could double my rooks on the c-file and also get my queen to attack this c3 pawn. So what would be a good way to do that? Well, first of all, my rook is attacked because they've just captured here. I had a pawn on c3 that they've captured. And so I obviously have to save my attacked rook. So if I save my rook, let's say rook to c2, then from there, what would be my plan to try and double rooks and get a queen to attack this pawn? And so my plan, of course, is this rook is almost certainly going to go to c1. So that just makes perfect sense. But what about my queen? How can I get the queen to actually attack this pawn? And so I think the shortest route, or at least what I came up with in the game, is a very short plan where I just play queen to f5. And queen to f5, my idea is not some crazy attack on their king. It's not some idea on their rook. It's for the sole purpose of then retreating back to d3. And now I'm adding more pressure to this pawn. And they can't really do much. I think it's actually a very hard plan to stop. I think that plan is achievable. Our dream position makes sense. And so I play rook to c2. They try and add a rook to try and get support, to their pawn here that was attacked. And then I play the idea, which was queen to f5. And then I can bring my other rook in, get my queen to d3, and I should have no problems here. Now I think my opponent actually played a little bit of a mistake here. Their move was they played pawn to g6. And it looks like it gains the tempo on my queen. Maybe it's like a useful move in some cases. But here, I think it really neglects what my entire plan was. I didn't intend to leave this queen here, so their move actually provokes me into playing a move that I wanted to play. I think better if they knew what my plan of queen to d3 was. I think probably better would have been something like queen to b7. So that when I play queen d3, maybe they can try and counter with like queen b3. And at least now they're attacking the a3 pawn, which stops me from doubling rooks if I don't want to drop my a pawn. So maybe that was a better try at defense. but nevertheless, it was a tough position to hold. So they played g6, I just come back, they try and defend their pawn, but now I just gang up on it with the exact plan, and my dream position actually worked here, and my opponent resigned in this position because there's no way they can save this pawn and go down a second pawn in this endgame that white should be definitely better. So that was a short example of a dream position, but now what happens if we look at a more complicated one, maybe one that takes a little bit more work and a little bit more calculation? So here in this position, this one is a lot trickier. Now we have a lot of plans that maybe we could come up with. So their king is pretty exposed. Maybe there will be some plan there. Can I take advantage of that right away? And right away, I think the answer is no. So maybe we have to reject that idea, so maybe that dream position doesn't work. I have a really nice knight here that's also really deep into the, queen side. Can I use this knight? Maybe attack c7, provoke them to move in this rook or something. And the answer to that also is no, because they've had this pawn defended, and I don't really see much prospects for that b5 knight. So maybe a dream position involving the queen side also doesn't work, and so we can reject that one. So now we have to look at, well, okay, what is the pressing issue? Something that we could really hope to achieve. Well, of course our bishop is attacked here on g5, and so their queen is attacking it. We should probably move the bishop or defend it. There isn't really a great way to defend this here, so we're probably going to move it. Now, one valid idea is to just say, well, I'll just move the bishop to e7, and if they take on g2 or something, that's fine because I'm attacking the rook, and it's very complicated. They're attacking our rook, and, things get a little bit messy, but I think white is probably okay there. However, I had a different idea here. I had a really cool dream position type of thought. My thought is, well, after this bishop moves somewhere, can I trap their queen on g2? And this is hypothetical, of course, because, this is a situation where I haven't calculated yet. But it's something that kind of gets the gears in your mind turning. And with that idea in mind, my dream position to try and basically trap their queen, not quite, but almost, was to actually, instead of go to e7 or somewhere else, I actually planned to go bishop back to h4. And it looks like I'm just saving the bishop, but the idea, which I had calculated for, is that when they capture on g2, now I actually have a way that I can almost trap their queen. And so this is the really nice move, which is knight to g3. And now it's important because we see the bishop, the whole point of this, is defending the knight. And so that's actually an important point where my bishop is there. So now they have really two options. They, have to either take the knight, something like the pawn, that's the pretty obvious testing one, or they can just ignore it and play something else and try and defend their king. But their queen is a bit cut off, and if they do nothing, I have rook d to g1, and that is very close to trapping their queen. We should also note that if their queen is ever on f2, this knight might move, and then we might actually have some kind of discovery attacks based on our bishop being located here on their queen. So you have to be a little careful here. So they probably made the best try here, which is to just capture my knight and put my idea to the test. But now I come very, very close to trapping their queen. I've sacrificed the knight, yes, but their queen is forced to f2 if it wants to be saved. And so now here comes a really cool idea. And this I calculated right before I came up with this whole dream idea. But this whole thing started when I had that dream position in mind about trying to trap the queen. So now I play rook captures g3, and this is strong, because we see now the idea that I had originally, which is a lot of pressure on the g-file, and trying to exploit their very exposed king. I might be able to double rooks, maybe long term I might even be able to get the queen to the g-file or something. There's just so many attacks coming. I even have queen to h6 in some lines, because this bishop is actually pinned to their king. So there's a lot of threats that I have here, and the queen also cannot stay here, because if the queen stays here, then I can actually sacrifice this rook with check, and on any recapture, I'll pick up the queen. So there's a lot of threats here. They have to be very, very careful. So with that being said, they really only have queen to b6 to save their queen, or queen to c5. Those are the only two moves I see. Everything else along the diagonal is controlled. They really have no other way to save their attack queen. So they do move back. But now from there, I'll just double rooks. And so now that I've doubled rooks, this is a very strong threat they have to defend. They tried to defend with rook to f7, but now I add even more pressure here, and I play queen to h6. And there's really no way to stop this attack. That's just overwhelming. It all started with a piece sacrifice, but all of that was even in mind because I had this dream position of trying to provoke this queen to be trapped because this bishop retreat when they took on g2. And all this was very forcing, and now they're in a losing position. And from here, I'll just very quickly breeze through the rest of the moves, just so you can kind of see how this eventually did end in checkmate. But here white is much better because of this complicated dream position that we had in mind. So they had a sacrifice here to stop the checkmate. They move their king over. I capture here. They move the rook. I move the king away just for a little extra safety. And then very shortly after moving the defender here, it's just going to be game over because I have this back rank idea coming up. I first set up checkmate here, which provokes rook to h6. But now that allows for this back rank, there's no way to stop it. And my opponent resigned because this will be checkmate in one move. So that was the end of that game. And so now I can go to the third example, which is a bit more practical one, which is shorter than this, but it's also exploiting what the opponent does wrong. So here, my opponent really just wanted to get castled, and they played knight f6, which is normally a pretty good developing move to try and get castled. However, in this case, this is a mistake because of the exploiting move that I found. There's a way to take advantage of this. And so if they had seen this before, instead of knight f6, they really had to play a move like pawn to a6. That is the top engine move to try and defend this because my threat is so strong. And so what is the threat that I have here? Well, the threat that I found was this dream position where I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if I could get a knight to c7? You know, that would be really strong. It would trap the rook. And it's also perhaps with check, you know, if they don't do anything. So I can actually threaten that by playing knight to b5. That seems like a very simple plan, but it stops them from castling, because if they castle, I have knight to c7, and this queen cannot take this because this is defended by the rook, or sorry, it's defended by my bishop. And if they can't take that, then eventually I'm going to win the rook in the corner. So they really have to defend against my attack on the c7 square, because knight c7 is a very real threat here. So now they actually have to defend this. They defend with knight a6 to guard that square. But now the second threat comes in mind, which they may not have seen, you know, when I originally played knight b5. And the threat is simply, well, I change plans. I go knight to d6. And the whole idea of this is to ruin their castling rights. Now they have to move their king, and their king will be forever stuck in the center. And because they didn't get castled quick enough, now their king can never castle, and we've kind of converted this advantage into something a little bit more permanent, where now it's a permanent weakness that their king is stuck in the center. So in the game, they actually played king e7, king f8 was better, but in both cases, they lose castling rights, and white is much better, and I went on to win a fine game. But all that started because back here, I had the idea, what would be a really nice thing I could get in this position? And here, it's the dream position of knight getting to b5, and then later to c7, perhaps d6, just to ruin their castling rights. So all of that is kind of the idea of kind of how you make plans in the middle game especially, but really any part of the game. If you have any position you're not so sure how to improve, consider making some kind of dream position in your mind, and then see, can I actually achieve that? Oftentimes, there will be a way that you can try and create these dream scenarios and actually make them reality, not just some huge dream in your mind. And if it is really unlikely to happen, well, that's okay. Then you just go back, you scratch the plan, and then you come up with another dream scenario that seems a little bit more likely. And eventually you'll find plans that you can actually implement in the game. So that is how you deal with these dream positions that Jeremy Silman came up with. Really helpful concept for improving your, overall chess position. And don't forget, like Bobby Fischer said, tactics flow from a superior position. So, with that being said, these dream positions are really useful in kind of setting up these long-term tactics and long-term ideas because we have so much pressure on the opponent, all because we had one cool idea and we ran with it, that dream position idea, and eventually, set up some really nice position that hopefully will help set up more things later down the road. So, I hope that one was useful for everyone. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next chess video.